I would avoid accepting such a gift. If it is a circumstance of da'wah, that is, where you're trying to get close to this person in order to give them some guidance, to clarify some things for them, to bring them closer to Islam, correct some of their mistakes, then it may be better to accept it on the basis of facilitating da'wah. Because if you reject it, perhaps it would make it difficult for you to try to communicate with them afterwards. But if it's a situation where this is not the case, then where you know the person is involved in haram, likely they're earning their money, they're working at a bank or any other of these type of situations where you're certain that they're getting portion of their wealth is coming from haram, then it's better not to accept gifts from them. And of course to tell them in a kind way, in a gentle way, you appreciate their thought, their concern for you, but based on the fact that their earnings are haram, in order to try to protect yourself and your home, you would avoid accepting such gifts. My husband wants me to wear the niqab. I'm not ready as yet to take this step. I do dress with jilbab and the big khimar. Am I disobeying him? Take into consideration that the niqab is not fard, that there is a difference of opinion on this issue. Please advise. Well, if we take the position that the wearing of niqab is recommended, commendable, not fard, and the husband asks the wife to do something which is from Islam, then technically speaking she should obey him. My advice to the brother would be, if your wife is not ready for it as yet, give her a chance to grow. That is a counter advice from the other side. But at the same time, for the sisters, if the brother asks you to do something which is a part of Islam, which is acceptable in Islam, then you are supposed to comply with his wish. Is it permissible for a woman to go out without a mahram for something important, such as taking a child to a school or a doctor, etc.? Yes, this is permissible. Where the issue of permissibility comes in, it is really in the area of travel, where a person is journeying, going on a journey. Not just moving about within the city, but going on a journey from that city to another city. Those are the times when the issue of having a mahram, according to the majority of scholars, become something where they have differed also as to whether it is possible at all. Some scholars hold that it's not possible if a woman is leaving the bounds of her city into another area, it is not permissible for her to travel without a mahram at all. Whereas the majority of scholars hold that as long as that journey is not longer than a day and a night, it is permissible for her. And in the case where a woman, for example, has no mahram, she has converted to Islam, she has no mahram, then for herself to travel to seek knowledge is permissible, because she is required Islamically to gain knowledge, and she has no mahram to accompany her to gain the knowledge. Then in that circumstance, and there is no community to provide a means of getting that knowledge, then it will be permissible for her to travel to get that knowledge. Can animals besides pork slaughtered by the people of the book be consumed by Muslims? There are a number of Muslims lately eating kosher meat with this excuse. It is legitimate. Kosher meat is considered halal meat according to Islamic law. And if a Christian also sacrifices an animal and cuts the neck of the animal while it is alive, this meat is also classified as halal meat. And this is according to Qur'an. The issues that some people try to raise that the Christians of today are not like the Christians of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a weak argument because the basic deviation which took place in Christianity had already occurred by the time the final revelation came in the 7th, 8th century. It was already all there. The three gods in one, everything else was there. Is it a sin to hate that your husband wants a second wife? No. How can one open their heart towards a polygamous relationship? Keep in mind this sister thinks polygamy is okay, even recommended, but with her husband she is jealous. Well, one can ask Allah to remove these feelings from the heart. One can look at it as being a part of the tests of this life, and that if one is patient with it, though it is difficult, that Allah will reward that individual for her patience. So she, by looking at it as a means of reward, just as we look at sickness, by being patient with sickness, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said that this is purification from sin. By being patient with a situation like that of polygamy, wherein one is jealous, one doesn't like it, but one is patient with it. I mean, this is of course where justice exists, not in circumstances of injustice, but where justice exists. That being patient with it, Allah will reward that individual that much more. What is the correct way to treat your non-Muslim neighbors? If they greet us, to greet them back. To give them food, if you are having food, to send some over to develop some kind of positive relationship with them, as a means of opening the door to give them some literature or some tapes or something, to try to open the door to get some Islam across to them. And this doesn't, treating non-Muslims in a kind way, doesn't affect the principle of al-wala and al-bara, where we love the believers and we hate the disbelievers. Is basic principle. Because what is not permissible is that we love the disbelievers over the believers. Because there will be people who do good to us, who are kind to us, etc., who we naturally will love. And that natural love is a part and parcel of what Allah has created us with, and there is no harm in that as long as we don't allow that love to cause us to take the disbelievers as confidants, as close friends who we depend on instead of believers. What are the dress requirements of a woman in the home? Well, it depends on what you mean in the home. If you mean in the presence of non-Muslims, then, in the presence of males who are non-mahram, so I meant to say non-mahram, then the dress requirements in the home is the same as the dress requirements in the street. In the case of people who are from the mahram, then the woman is allowed to relax her covering to the point of what they consider to be the major parts of the aura. What is below the neck to what is above the knee. If her arms are exposed, below her knee is exposed, it's permissible. I should just mention there is, of course, an issue which has to do with the non-Muslim women and the aura of Muslim women amongst non-Muslim women. Scholars have differed on this issue. Some have held that the Muslim woman should cover herself, at least covering all of her body, not necessarily wearing jilbab, etc., but at least covering her hair, not exposing any part of her body in front of a non-Muslim woman. Other scholars hold that it is permissible. The non-Muslim woman is like the mahram, that she may expose as she exposes to the mahram. And this opinion was expressed by Sheikh bin Baz, when he was asked this question. himself. So in other words, actually this includes, for example, breastfeeding, that a woman may breastfeed in front of a non-Muslim woman or other women, which involves exposing her breast to them. But this is, in the case of breastfeeding women, this is permissible. Is it permissible to teach children using music and singing? It has become very difficult to avoid these methods even in Islamic schools. Well, if music has to do with the forbidden instruments, wind and stringed instruments, then it is forbidden anyhow. If it is using a duff, a little drum-like thing that you hit to provide some rhythm as you are singing with them, then it is permissible. Is it permissible to declare bankruptcy on a student loan where they charge interest? We have called and asked to be charged without interest. The loan is for 11,000. We have to pay off 3,000. We want to go for Hajj, but we are told we can't until we are debt-free. To declare bankruptcy on a student loan. And so the point is that first, when they take a student loan, they have signed a contract saying that they will pay interest. Once you have signed that contract, as a Muslim, you are bound by your word, It's not a question that we can say, well, we're dealing with non-Muslims and this is the only way and we will just, renege when the time comes to pay. No, because then what we have done is we've become like the Jews who make it permissible to take interest from non-Jews but not permissible amongst themselves. Righteousness is righteousness. And there are no lines that we draw, so we are righteous to Muslims and unrighteous to non-Muslims. So where one has a debt that has to be cleared, one has to do so before making Hajj. Now, if that debt is something that you are paying off on a monthly basis, say for example over a year, it's not something which is obligatory from you at that moment, that you owe 3,000 and they need that 3,000, then you should pay it within the next month. But you have it spread out over a period of time. Then it is still possible for you to go to make Hajj if you know you have money which you will be able to pay on a monthly basis and complete that payment. Are there any specific prayers for women to say during her pregnancy or delivery? It is common in our culture, Pakistan, for women to recite Surah Maryam in order to make the birth easy. Is this permitted? It is possible to recite Surah Maryam. Whether it will make the birth easy or not, there's another question. We have no hadith from Prophet ﷺ to that effect, so no one can claim that this will happen. But reciting Qur'an during times of pregnancy, any portions of the Qur'an, any du'as, the Prophet ﷺ had taught us in times of physical ailments, etc., to utilize these du'as. Inshallah, with that, inshallah, Allah will make things easier for them. And if not, whatever difficulty they face, they should look at it as being purification from sins and be patient with it. Can a Muslim wife request a separate residence from her in-laws? What rights does she have to privacy in her own husband's home? Yes, she has the right to separate residence. The husband cannot make her live with her in-laws unless she agrees. And even when they do so, within that home, there should be an area which is the wife's area, which she has control over. Not that she has to be functioning out of the same kitchen and out of the same, bathroom areas as the rest of the family, where difficulties and problems are likely to arise. So the woman should have an area. The house should be divisible in such a way that she will have her own area, which is her own area of control. There is a woman I know who converted to Islam and then got married to a Muslim, but now the husband doesn't practice Islam. Is this woman going to be punished because she does not even pray and her husband doesn't even teach her to pray? Well, seeking knowledge is compulsory for her. She needs to learn to pray. Whether her husband prays or he doesn't pray, it is still her responsibility. She cannot stand before Allah on the Day of Judgment and say, I didn't learn how to pray because my husband didn't pray. No, she has a responsibility to gain that knowledge herself. And if she doesn't seek and gain it, then she can be punished for not performing her prayers. It is forbidden to hit young children in order to discipline them. No, although some scholars hold, like Sheikh Nasir, hold that young children should only be hit for prayer, because the hadith mentioned you teach your children salat at the age of 7 and spank them for it at the age of 10, so that they should not be struck for any other reason. He's taken the literal text of the hadith, not that hitting from the hadith is made permissible, but he's taken it as being only in that context. Whereas the majority of scholars hold that it is permissible to hit young children for discipline. But I would say that hitting should only take place when a person is not in a state of anger. That the hitting should really be for discipline and not, a venting of emotions. Out of anger, one is striking the child, because then the child will not learn discipline. The child will only learn to avoid mother when she's angry. I'm thinking of making hijrah to the UAE and wanted to know if they have treatment for asthma and diabetes. Is it right for an ex-husband to fight you in court for child custody when she's doing the best she can for the child? Two questions. In terms of treatment for asthma and diabetes, as far as I know, the treatment does exist there. In the UAE, the medical facilities there are quite advanced. In terms of the husband fighting in the court for custody of the child, one would have to say, what is the condition here? The sister is saying she's doing the best she can for the child, but perhaps that best is not sufficient. If the child's needs are not being looked after properly, then if she will not give the child up to her husband so that he could provide the necessary means for the child, then it would be legitimate for him to gain custody through the court. But if she is taking care of the child properly, and he is providing the maintenance that he should for the child, then of course it's not permissible for him to seek custody from her. What is the best strategy? Actually, what I'll do is that, as we're going through the questions, if somebody is the one who wrote the question, for example, and something is not clear from what I've said and they want to make a follow-up, you can just raise your hand and you can state what you'd like to follow up with. Go ahead, sister. Could you raise your voice a bit, please? Well, of course this is wrong. If he is not providing maintenance, he has no right to seek that. Because if he were providing what he should be providing, then whatever the child needs would be fulfilled. So that would not be legitimate. What is the best strategy to deal with a Muslim who, after taking or talking to them, showing them the proof from the Qur'an, the Sunnah, still is doing haram things, i.e. wearing transparent hijab, wearing perfume, makeup outside the home? Take in consideration if the person is your roommate in close quarters with you. Well, you shouldn't break ties with that person. I haven't finished answering the question yet, please. You shouldn't break ties with that person. You should still continue to advise that person. You want to keep the door open because you never know when a good word from you is going to affect that person. Because our job fundamentally, as Allah said to Prophet ﷺ, that his responsibility is to guide, is to convey the message. إِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ وَعَلَيْنَا الْحِسَابُ. That what is on the Prophet is balagh. This is conveying the message, and Allah is the one who would take people to account. The account is with Allah. What happens? Whether they're guided, whether they're not guided, this is left with Allah. Our job is just to convey the message. And as long as people are willing to listen to that message, then we should continue to convey the message.
It's not related to the...
Somebody wanted to follow up on that? No? How does one dress in front of the father-in-law, considering we live in the same house? can you elaborate more in reference to the proper dress in front of other believing women? I heard sleeveless dresses, shirts, etc. are not permissible in front of each other. The general opinion is that it is permissible. Sleeveless dresses, shirts, etc. in front of other women is permissible. In the case of the father-in-law, because the father-in-law is a mahram for life. Father-in-law is a mahram for life. One may be in front of him covering the major part of the aura, and what is beyond that, one may not. But of course, see, what we're talking about is, that is like the minimum. That is the minimum. In some countries where people have limited amounts of clothing, etc., etc., then we know that at least that much is permissible for them. But of course, for a woman to maintain, a more complete covering, maybe for example, just only leaving out her hair or maybe parts of her arms, something like this would be better, because even though people may be considered mahram, we do know that incest does take place, etc. So we don't want to wear anything which would maybe encourage behavior which is sinful. But just to know what is actually required, the basic requirement, this is legally the basic requirement. What should you do if your husband does not want to make hijrah? Well, again, one has to look at the situation, how bad the situation is. What are you and your husband doing? Are you involved in establishing community, involved in da'wah? Are your children in Islamic school, so on, so you can see that you are able to practice, a good deal of Islam. In such circumstances, then if he doesn't want to make hijrah at this point, it's better for you to stay with him. But if it is a circumstance where, the family is falling apart, the children are going out of Islam, you can hardly practice, you're put under a lot of pressure there, and you need to impress on him the need for hijrah. My advice would be to talk to other brothers who may talk to this person if he has the means to make hijrah, to encourage him to do so. And if in the end you feel that he doesn't want to change, people are pressing him and he still won't accept it, and you fear for your deen, when you reach a state where you fear for your deen remaining in a given circumstance, it is then permissible for you to seek annulment through khula of your marriage, so that you can survive, you and your Islam can survive. Somebody said something? I know that gold is not haram, but a hadith whereby Fatima was wearing a gold ring and the Prophet ﷺ told her to remove it, does this make it haram? The point is, considering the various hadiths, we have to take all of them together. And the conclusion of the majority of scholars with regards to the hadith on gold is that it is permissible for women. We can conclude from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he seemed to disfavor wearing of gold as a general recommendation that it would be better for women to avoid it. But in the end, the bottom line is that it is permissible for them.
Before you read it aloud.
Okay, with regards to the question of oral sex, there are a number of early scholars who have stated that this is permissible. This is found in Qurtubi's tafsir, which is one of the most classical tafsirs of the Qur'an, that it is permissible. Some of the scholars of this time who have addressed the issue have identified it as not being permissible. What I would say is that when you consider issues of haram and halal, there's a general rule that you can use to determine what approach should you take to this particular thing. If it is something which is from worship, from the acts of worship, what are known as ibadat, then you should assume that all of such acts are forbidden unless the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has specifically made it permissible. Whereas the other categories, what are known as the mu'amalat, these are social dealings which have to do with individual social relations, man-man relations, male-female relations, trade, the kind of dress you wear, all these different types of things. The basic rule in this is that it is all halal except that which the Prophet ﷺ or the Qur'an has specifically forbidden. So if we look at the issue of oral sex, we have to say this is from mu'amalat and not from the level of ibadat. So for us to say it is haram, then it requires specific evidence to prohibit it. And really the texts do not specifically prohibit it. You know, people may judge or may conclude or may draw, answers or principles on the basis of general issues, like for example the issue of najasa, urine is najis, so the place where urine comes from could be classified as a place of najasa. So to put oneself in that situation where one could say, well, this is something abhorrent. You could argue that it is something abhorrent. But then again, to say it is forbidden, again you run into a problem. Because though something which is maybe on your clothes may be considered to be not permissible, right? Blood, for example, it is not permissible for you to have it on your clothes. But for you to take a blood transfusion for out of need, medically so and so, this is permissible. Drinking blood, per se, this is not permissible. In the case of urine, we know Prophet ﷺ prescribed for some people who are sick in Medina, drinking camel's urine along with milk. So, there are issues concerning urine, that maybe it's on your clothes, you can say this is najasa. Of course, if you get it on your clothes, you should not pray in it, you should remove it. But the other issues that come up which have to do with sex and so on, then this doesn't have an issue concerning prayer, etc., etc. So it's not sufficient an argument to say on the basis of this we can say it is haram. Where is the proof about niqab? Where does it say that niqab is recommended? What do you do if you believe that a person should wear face cover or niqab and your husband says you can't because he fears for your safety? Since in the US, people react or can react very poorly to this. The issue of niqab, we know that this was the way of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They covered themselves up completely, and we know that there are narrations about when the verse of hijab came, how the women covered themselves where only one eye was visible. These are all narrations, relating to it. So, at minimum, we can say that it would be a recommended practice. If it was practiced by the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the believing women of Medina, many of them, then we can say on the basis of this that this is preferable. But the issue of it being compulsory, of course, this is the issue wherein scholars have differed. Now, where a woman feels that it is compulsory for her to cover her face, because she has seen the evidence, whatever, and she concludes that it is compulsory, and her husband says she cannot, then technically speaking, we'd have to say that she should cover her face, because she believes that it is compulsory, in which case for her to uncover her face would be sinful. But what I would say to the sister is that since there is a difference of opinion on this issue, that there are well-known scholars who hold that it is not compulsory and others hold that it is compulsory, that if your husband is requesting you something which among the scholars, the well-known scholars, they hold that this is permissible, then again it is preferable to comply with the wishes of your husband. But before doing that, I would still say to advise or have some other brothers who could advise the sister, advise your husband to allow you to do so, that they try to advise him in that way. But if he insists, then I would say personally that it would be better for you to go along with your husband's position, though in your heart know that inshallah that this is what you prefer, and of course Allah will reward you for your intention to do so, and at the same time for your intention to follow the instructions of your husband in an area which the deen does indicate some difference, where some leeway where a person may or may not do it. I took a loan when I was in disbelief, then became Muslim, and now I have to pay the loan. Am I accountable for that? No, you're not held to account in the sense that you're paying interest, that you're held to account for that, because this is before Islam. My husband is poor. Is it allowed for me to work if I'm going to sell pork? Someone told me it is haram. Well, of course, what is forbidden to us is forbidden for us to sell. And we should avoid workplaces where we're involved in selling what is haram. But if one is in a situation where this is the only means of providing for your family, then one may do so temporarily until one finds another option, and one should be actively seeking another option. If you are invited to a friend's house and you feel that it will cause more fitna by going, and I know that if a Muslim invites you, you have to go. Well, if you're trying to avoid fitna, then for you not to go, because whenever we have something, again, which is from the Sunnah, something recommended of us, if that thing may lead to a greater problem, then we may give up that aspect of the Sunnah. And this is well-known principle, that if in trying to do something which is good, not something compulsory, but something which is good, one is going to bring about a greater problem, then it is better to avoid that small good to prevent the bigger evil. Sisters relaxing their hijab when in the company of other Muslim women or non-Muslim women. Some women may be too talkative and may talk about what they see and do in the company of other women. Of course, that possibility does exist, but that becomes their sin. That becomes their sin. A husband and wife have relations, and when a woman sits with other women, she may talk about it. So because of the fact that women may talk about these things, should we say that women shouldn't sit together? No. If the woman talks about what transpires in the bedroom, then she carries the sin of having done so. She shouldn't. Yes, that's what I'm saying. It is sinful. To do so, she will carry the sin. But because this is a possibility, can we say that women shouldn't sit together, married women shouldn't sit together because it is possible that they may talk about what goes on in the bedroom? No. We cannot make that rule because of what may happen. So in the same way, because if women when sitting together relax their hijab, some women may talk about the beauty of some other women or whatever aspects of themselves. This is not sufficient argument to say that the women should maintain their hijab because other women may talk. No. What one can do for oneself, if one fears that to oneself, then one can maintain one's hijab. But what we're talking about is a principle for people in general. You know, what you personally, you as an individual may feel that you want to do more, you want to maintain certain things which are not required of you, this is permissible. What should I do when I'm left with my brother-in-law alone in the house with him. I don't like it, but the people I live with don't understand why it is wrong. Well, when you're left in the house alone with him, you try to avoid being in a room alone with him. Being in the house alone with him is not in and of itself prohibited if your husband permits it. Right? Actually, if your husband permits, for example, he knows somebody is coming and he's not going to be in the house, and he says, please, when the person comes, let them in, go and sit in the front room. You stay in the other part of the house. This is permissible. This is with the husband's permission. So a brother-in-law, even more so, if he can be in the house there, but you would avoid sitting in a room alone with him, which is the point at which fitna can occur. And you should insist that, for example, he may not walk into parts of the house because he may take it upon himself. You may be in the kitchen, he wants to come in the kitchen and be there with you. In such circumstance, you should, insist or instruct him that he should not do so, or ask your husband